Hey Jen, thanks so much for coming today. The objective of today is to really talk about what an environmental scientist does. You have a vast amount of experience, over 20 years in environmental consulting. It was a company that we worked together, Duffield Associates, which was recently acquired by Verdantis, and you're a division director for them. Your background is in geology. You have an undergrad from Temple University, and you completed your master's at the University of Delaware, which is my alma mater also. You're extremely intelligent, and when I worked for Duffield, you really mentored me in my first job out of college, and you were just such a good role model, full of experience and knowledge at that time, so I can only imagine how much it's grown in 20 years. I think that as a high school teacher, we go through the curriculum, we teach all the topics, and students at the end of the year have a good understanding of the issues that are out there. I think that a lot of students leave the class and they just have absolutely no idea what an environmental scientist actually does in a practical application, what they do for a career. Well, I just wanted to talk about your day-to-day and just ask you a bunch of questions and find out what an environmental scientist really does, or a geologist, working as an environmental consultant.
Yeah, with the young people who are coming into the industry. Now, this is environmental consulting. There's lots of places an environmental scientist could find a job, but consulting, what that means is we are hired to investigate and solve environmental problems for all kinds of people, for major businesses, for developers who want to build the next strip mall, unfortunately, to public space municipalities who have a mandate to create open space and green space for their citizens. There's a lot of places as a consultant you touch property and protect people and the environment. When we bring young people in, the passion is so tangible. They do want to save the world. And I think that's a wonderful sentiment. But I've always been someone who believed that, that it's an old phrase, think globally, but act locally.
Yes.
You can make your corner of the world a better place. Everyone can. And when I think about what I've done, I've always said, I've made the world a better place, one property parcel at a time. Right?
Yeah.
It eventually builds up. You work long enough, and your corner gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Exactly. So I guess let's start kind of at the beginning.
For our people, when they first start, we like them to be about 60% in the field and 40% in the office.
Okay.
So when they're in the field, you're working with contractors, drillers, geoprobe operators. Geoprobes are another kind of drilling, but it's instead of a twisting auger, it's a push, and we record what we see. We log the soils we see, right? So is it sand? Is it silt? Is it gray? Is it brown? Is there brick in it? If there's brick, it's fill. Is there rock? Down in Florida, I imagine look, it's limestone, and we're limestone, and sand, and that kind of stuff. So we create these holes in the ground, and we might collect some water for sampling and send it off to a lab. We don't analyze soil or water for chemicals. We send them to environmental laboratories, which is another place an environmental scientist might go. Someone with a chemistry background might find themselves working in a lab. We record those observations and we bring this data back to the office. And the next step for that, early staff science level person is to take that data and aggregate it and compare it to standard numbers and tell someone like me, well, yeah, we have the exceedances of this or that, or it looks great, or, whatever, and develop maps to show where these samples were collected and start working on a report where we can provide our observations and recommendations.
When I worked at Duffield, one of my most common tasks was doing phase 1 environmental site assessments. So I think in this consulting industry, that's one of the most popular things that we provide as a consultant. So can you maybe just tell us a little bit about what an ESA is?
Yeah. So phase 1 ESA is, that's going back to that story of a site. Tell the story of the site, right?
Yeah.
Those assessments, the reason we do them is there's a federal standard for looking at property that if you go through the steps of having this assessment done, you, the person who had this work done, you have no environmental liability associated with that property, right? You've done it's called due diligence. So you do your due diligence, you've looked for any indication it could be contaminated, you did or didn't find any, it's documented, and you get this liability protection. And that protection comes out of the EPA's Superfund law. It's very important to lenders, or if people are buying property that could have contamination because of the known uses, like a general chemical, for example, yeah. or some other big business that manufacture chemicals, or automobile plants, or those kinds of things. You want those kind of assessments because they'll protect you from environmental problems and identify places that need to be cleaned up, and again, tell that story of the site. So what we do, there's like three main components. The first is a historic review, and that's when you look at those old aerial photographs. Typically they go back to 1940, and you look every 10 years from 40 to now to 2020. Historic maps, topographic maps, which are great for seeing things like old streams that don't exist anymore because people filled them in. Cool. Old quarries, forested land, wetland, floodplains, all that stuff's important for site development and an understanding of the site. We look at fire insurance maps, and that's probably the thing people are least familiar with. Fire insurance maps were, and still are, developed by communities so that when there are responders to a fire, they know what they're getting into with the building. So they'll show like whole blocks of cities, and it'll tell you what the construction of the building is and how many stories it is, and where the water main hookups are. And it's also great for environmental because it'll also tell you where the buried tanks are, where the above ground petroleum tanks are, or other chemical storage areas, because when there's a fire, you need to know where that stuff is.
Sure, right? Of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So that's a great resource. We'll look back into the deed history of a property to know who owned it. I've got some stories about where I thought it was a pristine piece of land and found out it was actually owned by a chemical company, and turned out they did dump chemicals on that property. So anyway, that's one component, that historic review. And then we do a database review where we look into, was this site ever regulated by the EPA or the state protection agencies?
And those are brownfield or Superfund sites, or?
Brownfield, Superfund, registered tanks, air emissions. There's so many databases out there. So we'll look at that. And then we interview previous owners, and we interview the EPA if we need to, or DEP. And finally, we go to the site and we put our eyes on it and we look at it. And, I always, if I get on a site and I'm like, ooh, my spidey sense is tingling, I know, at this point in my career, then we bring it all together in a document. And that document is very long because of all the data you aggregate. It has to be part of it. They're typically, for a typical site in Philly, it's 400 to 600 pages long.
Wow.
Nobody wants to read it.
I feel like it's longer than we used to do.
Right. The text itself is probably 14 pages, and
Right.
And it leaves your client with a path, right? It's everything's great. We don't think you need to follow up, or, oh boy, there are some things we think we need to take a closer look at. And that's when we would roll into a phase 2 ESA, which might involve sampling or I don't know, going to the EPA and meeting with people and actually putting our hands on documents and reading them a little more closely, or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So the reason why phase 1s are where everybody starts is because it's where you learn to look at the world through the lens of environmental impact and issues. Like you've lived your life, you've been walking through the streets and you never saw anything more than the brick building and the concrete sidewalk. And after you do phase 1s, you now see, oh, that's the fill pipe for that oil tank in that building. And oh, wow, look at that. They have a water tank on their roof. That must be for the fire suppression system. And you just look at the world in a different way. And that helps you calibrate that muscle.
I remember going on, farm sites, like people wanted to take a large parcel of farmland and convert it to a neighborhood.
We'd go on and
do all sorts of soil samples, and we look around for places where they might have like changed the oil in the tractor, and all sorts of like little things that the average person really wouldn't think of. You have to think of any environmental impact that person might have made on that site.
Oh yeah, my favorite farm story was, I have a couple, but this one's my favorite.
Yeah.
It was a property that was going to be donated as open space down in southern Delaware. And I was walking it, and they were talking about the stream valley, and it's so beautiful. And I was like, oh, well, let me see it. And I took one look at it, and I was like, oh no, this is a mess. And they didn't know what to look for. And the land was all wonky, hummocky, and I was like, oh, there's buried stuff here. And we started looking around, and I just happened, they happened to have a shoveler or something. And I was like poking around, and we found, no joke, somebody went through the effort of burying an entire trash truck filled with trash.
Are you kidding me? What?
An entire trash. I was astonished. I was like, the work it took to put that thing under.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully they had an excavator or something.
Right, it was insane. And the plates on it was from Pennsylvania. And I want to say it was like, the sticker was like 1980 something. Right. So it wasn't like this happened in, the Wild West before there was an EPA.
They knew there were some rules that they were ignoring completely.
Right.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. The client said, can we just leave it here? And I was like, no.
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask, but was the client that actually was responsible, or had they acquired the property after that 1980s
they
date?
got the property after.
Yeah, so it's the previous owner. And I guess that's the next question is, as an environmental consultant, what kind of powers do you have to you just really present the data, right? And then they would have to take it up with a lawyer and maybe go out after a previous property owner and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the only time so I am a licensed geologist. I'm licensed by Pennsylvania and Delaware. And I have an ethical obligation under that license that if I saw something that I believed could harm people or the environment, I will report it.
Sure.
Hands down. Yeah, and I have done that. I did not report this trash incident. Duffield, I was the Philadelphia division director. So I ran a Philadelphia office, had 16 people in it, doing all kinds of things. We had environmental scientists, geologists, civil engineers, water resource engineers, doing a lot of different kinds of things. And now I lead the practice for the entire Mid-Atlantic. So I'm in charge of environmental services for New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. So my day-to-day isn't what it used to be when we worked together, Jay. I do have a lot of projects, but I delegate a lot of work to young managers and young scientists. So my day-to-day is me and my cell phone. But so one of my major clients is the city of Philadelphia, public property. And over the last 5 years, we've investigated all of their playgrounds and rec centers and recreational fields for lead in soil, because there's a concern, because it's an old city, and old cities lead from emissions, right? From
Exactly.
It does impact soil. It's a fact. And we've identified a few sites that we needed to go back and understand a little better. And we just finished a cleanup, was soccer fields. So
what do you typically do when you want to clean up?
Right. So we sample the soil first so that we understand how much soil has to come off, because the plan was to take off soil, right? Dig it up, throw it in a truck, send it to a place that can treat it, a landfill facility, and then bring in clean soil and design new playing fields. That was our scope. So my civil team in Philly designed the playing fields. And then the environmental team designed the cleanup. And we also had a landscape architect on our team who, did all the trees and the plants and all of that.
Very nice.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
This particular cleanup had some wrinkles in it because we found stuff we were only looking for lead. But
if you look, you will find.
right. So we were really looking for lead, but when you have to take stuff off a site and send it to another place, you have to know everything that's in that soil. And we found some really hazardous stuff, and it was troubling to know that kids had been playing on those fields.
No, I know. As you're investigating, you act as like a detective, and you have to almost be a historian, right?
Before you investigate a site, before you grab soil or water, you want to know what happened, like who occupied that property, what happened there. There's some assumptions you can make, but sometimes there's crazy stuff happens and you never anticipate if you didn't do that forensic piece first, right? Like it's definitely an investigation. Like you really want to understand more than just chemicals in soil.
Sure.
The human impact is pretty big.
I remember doing some visits with you, and we would go as a team out in the field, and we were sampling asbestos. We'd go into these old buildings. I just remember one. I think it was a former office building, but it was beautiful. There was marble. There was all sorts of ornate decorations. And the owner had taken over the property and found that there were all these environmental concerns. We had to go in and just chisel away at this like beautiful marble and like just chop through it and get through. And right behind it, we found all of these ducts and everything else that had thick, friable asbestos. We were in our respirators.
That had to be the courthouse, right? Was that the courthouse?
It might have been the courthouse, and as the project went on, we went through the phases, and as it went on, we kept finding more stuff, and we're like, oh, that's going to be another big expense. And
That was a huge job. I remember more working with you, Jay, when we'd have to get on roofs and we'd have the extension ladder, and we would just be laughing and laughing. We could do this.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
We're crawling on roofs, and we're just trying to sample a little bit of mastic, like from the roof, and just see if it contained any like whatever PCBs, right, or whatever, or asbestos. I do remember another, and I don't know if I'm even allowed to say the client name, so I won't. But it was a chemical plant, and we went on site and we did some samples, and like the soil was like magenta.
It's a client. You could say it.
It was General Chemical. It was near. It was near Archmere Academy, I think.
That's a tough site. That one. We're actually back on that.
Are you? Okay. I know. Clients are confidential, so I can edit out the name.
Oh my God, that thing has had so many different hands, and General Chemical is all over the papers. You're okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. There's so many jobs that run through my mind. Like we went to southern New Jersey. We went into it was a rural town. We went in and found that there was, I don't know, probably 12 to like 18 inches of gasoline on top of the water table right in town. It was a gas station, topography-wise. Woodstown, that's it. Yep.
Yeah. That's still going on too.
Is that still going on? Okay. I'm kind of curious about all these projects because.
Yeah. So that one, we put in. It's one of the things you do when you have. We call that free product, gasoline over the water table, free product, because gas will float. It's lighter. Anyway, we put in an interceptor trench. So we dug a trench and down the hill from that impact,
right?
So that it would collect the gas, and then we pumped it to tanks. So we did clean that up. It's not great, but
I just remember
at least something was happening, right? Because people lived around there too. I know. People's front yards.
It was like right in town. It was like I remember like one of the wells we were sampling was like right in the middle of a parking lot.
Yep.
And you'd go in and then set up your pump and pump out the top like 12 inches for as long as you could, and then over time, the gasoline would fill in the well again, and we'd pump again, and you just keep doing that until the job is done.
And New Jersey eventually said that's not enough. You need to do more to recover all of that product, and that's why we put the trenches in. I mean, the good part about that story is, with all those homes around with basements, nobody ever had gas in their basement. And we would sample the air in the basement to make sure there were no volatiles from that gas getting into their homes. And it was never an issue. So that was just, frankly, good luck.
It was the one factory. It was the molasses factory. I don't know if you remember that, but
that story.
There was like giving like volatile organics were being detected in the emissions of the factory, and they're like, we did everything, in compliance. Like, how is this possible? We're not even putting anything up there. And after Rick investigated, scratched his head, I think he was the one that came up with that the molasses, as it was going up, it was condensing on the smokestack itself. And it actually, over time, it was, full of sugars. It was fermenting, and it was giving out like, alcohol compounds in the emissions that were being detected.
Well, that's a cool story. I hadn't heard that one.
Oh, really? Yeah, it was really neat. So like they basically just said, clean out your smokestacks and just keep them clean, and your emissions will go back to normal, and it fixed the problem. What is your most polluted or most toxic site ever visited, or just something interesting, that you might be able to think of?
This is a good one. I tell this story a lot because there was so many things happening. So this was a city block in Wilmington, Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
It was owned by MBNA back in the day, which was bought out by Bank of America. Long before I started at Duffield, it was a factory, and it was knocked down, and they just threw some dirt on it and put some fencing up and put some grass on it, and just didn't know what to do with it. MBNA did not know what to do with this site. And then when Bank of America got it, they were like, well, we need to do something with this. And Bank of America became our client. And I started looking into this site, and I don't know if you remember it. It was called Brandywine Fiber and Wholesale Electronics.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a long burn, this one. I started it when I was 30, and I finished it at 40. So it took 10 years to clean this site, to kind of get this thing right.
Yeah.
So we investigated it. So the first thing you do, right? Maps and deeds and all of this stuff. So this site in the 1800s was a match factory, and then it became a tannery, and then it became vulcanized fiber plant.
Okay.
They would make tires and stuff. And then they packaged auto racing fuels on this site.
Okay. Oh my gosh.
And then finally
adding it all up.
Right? Like finally they did some sort of electronic manufacturing. So 5 very, very different land uses. And when we started our investigation, what we found is, they demolished the buildings, but they didn't remove any of the infrastructure of any of that activity, right? Okay. So big concrete vats were still in the ground filled with tannery waste. And tannery waste, so basically they would take hides that still had fur on them and then use heavy metals to remove that fur. So chromium and lead and arsenic, cadmium sometimes. And we saw that. And when you opened up the earth, it just was putrid. It was disgusting. I think the odor was overwhelming.
Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
We found a bunch of, really large underground tanks still filled with product, and there was oil everywhere in the soil. We found zinc contamination from vulcanized fiber, because they evidently use zinc. I didn't know I had to study that to understand how vulcanized fiber is made.
Yeah.
So we found really high zinc contamination. Not hazardous. Arsenic, lead, cadmium, chromium, hazardous. For sure, the concentrations were eye-popping.
Oh my gosh.
The good part about that, though, is that those hazardous chemicals were contained in those vats.
And how are you dressed as you're sampling? Like,
well, we would wear certainly boot coverings and gloves. Yeah. And once we realized how stinky it was, we definitely went with respirators, right?
Sure.
So we found all that stuff, and we designed this cleanup, and I worked with the state to figure out what the best way to deal with this problem. So we removed the upper 10 feet of soil across a 2-acre site.
Oh my gosh.
Huge volume of
Yeah.
soil,
Yeah.
hazardous soil. It was millions of dollars to clean this up. And we get to towards the end, like we're almost done this project, and there's
Right.
maybe 100-foot strip of land where we were just backing our way out so that, and we were backfilling as we were going.
Yeah.
And I remember standing there going, man, I never saw any indication of a match factory on here.
Oh no.
Right? Famous last words.
Yeah.
I'm in Philadelphia, and they're in that last bit of the project, and I get a call. Jen, the soils are on fire.
Oh no.
What do you think the soils are for? She's like, we found this stone brick. We thought it was a privy of sorts, a big brick-lined well of some kind. We didn't know for sure. And I said, dig that out. Our client wants zero liability. As they were scooping it out and the soils were drying, matches that, are made with phosphorus, right? White phosphorus. And then when it's exposed to air, it ignites. And we didn't know what we were dealing with. So they dumped the soils out. And as they dried up, it just burst into flames.
Oh my gosh.
And so I broke land speed records from Philadelphia to Wilmington to see this happen.
Yeah.
And I called the state, and they wanted to come see it happen. And the next thing you knew, it was like a classroom of people going, so that's super cool. And
what was the emergency protocol? I was going to say, if you call the fire department, right?
Fire department. Because I said, well, it's burning itself out. Can't we just kind of let it do its thing? And they were like,
no,
absolutely not.
That sounds like you, Jen.
It's a practical solution.
Curiosity, yeah.
Absolutely not. So what? Oh gosh, so we ended up
with some marshmallows, right?
Right. There's a lot of funky stuff burning in that soil too.
Oh yeah.
We ended up having to put all of that material in 55-gallon drums, 250 55-gallon drums, and topping them off with water.
Yeah. And
they were put on a train and sent out to Nevada, where I believe they probably just dumped it all out and let it do its thing.
Into some mountain somewhere, or
Yeah,
that was been fighting back pretty hard recently. they're saying no a lot these days. Yeah,
right. Oh my gosh. The thing about that site is the lesson I learned from that was there's always something left behind. If it was a match factory, there absolutely is going to be something there, and if you didn't see it, it's because you haven't looked hard enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That was my lesson. I never found the tanks until we started digging them up, and I was like, well, that's where the oil came from. We knew there had to be one.
Yeah,
it was there.
Right. You got to find the source. Yeah, it's exactly.
Right now, I am at the end of an investigation. I should get approval from the state soon. It's in Pennsylvania, and it's chlorinated solvents in groundwater, and it's very tricky because chlorinated solvents are denser than water. And so they're at the bottom of the aquifer, and they got into the bedrock aquifer. But the cool thing about this, from a geology perspective, is it is only flowing in fractures, and the fractures in the Piedmont of Pennsylvania are all oriented in the same direction. So it's a linear plume. It's like lenticular, and I found the ends of it, and I modeled it. And it shouldn't go any further. And it's really exciting to actually be able to draw a boundary around a problem like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And is there any chance of drilling for recovery somehow? Pump down to that level? And
so expensive. And then you think, well, what's the risk? Is anybody using the water at that depth? And it's all public water out there. There are no supply wells. So we're talking only one side of environmental science, which I do. Natural resources is also a really great direction to go in. So that's wetlands and soil science, and working with stream restoration, and all that stuff is really, I think that's all interesting. I'm more interested in rocks and living things, but
of course, yeah.
I was going to say, when I think of the future, though, of environmental consulting, I think coastal resiliency, sea level rise, and understanding things like wetlands and transition areas and streams. I think that's the future of environmental consulting. Not to say cleanup's going away, trust me.
Right. It's always going to be there.
But I think the more resources will be pumped into the coastal resiliency side of the world. And of course, compliance, the air stuff, coastal zone rules, all of that. I will say this, I think, as a closing, I've had a really great career. I've been so fortunate. I'm naturally inquisitive. I like solving problems, and I love working with people. And it all kind of comes together under a consulting umbrella. And I worked for a company that took great care of me, for sure. And I still work for a good company. Verdantis is a good company too. It's just big. We went from 100 people to there's 400 people.
Wow.
So it's an adjustment, but it's great. And, I think I've just been really blessed with just a lot of good fortune, a lot of good timing. And another thing, for those who are interested in becoming environmental scientists or geologists or chemists or whatever, it is the career that's projected to be in the top 10 most lucrative for a very long time. So it's a good direction to go in. And again, coastal resiliency, sea level, all those things are going to be on the forefront for sure.
Need good people. So, all right, cool. Well, that was the goal. And I think you're just, once again, such a good role model. I mean, I just enjoyed working with you so much. And,
thanks, Jay.
No, I thought you were the perfect person to kind of share, the day to day, just with students out there who, are kind of trying to make that life decision at this point and choose their path. And just you gave them a one good option, in environmental consulting.
Well, I have fond memories of you, Jay. I just remember really enjoying. Yeah, we did laugh a lot, and I'm very happy I got to meet you, and I'm glad we're still friends today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy.
All right. See you on Facebook.
All right, sounds good. Bye, Jen.